Was Missouri's longest-serving female prisoner a murderer or a scapegoat of sexism and tunnel vision? This is the Patty Prewitt story. Hi, Amy, and hello, listeners.
Hi, I think I know this case. Is it in my wheelhouse a little bit?
It is in your wheelhouse, and it was a suggestion. Guess who suggested it?
Someone at the last happy hour.
No, but it's someone who's become quite popular on our show as of recently. Someone who's gotten some recent 5-star reviews on Apple on our show.
Oh, your mom. Oh my God. Yes. I told you, I'm like, what was it yesterday that you were like, I have to, we haven't spoken in a while. I'm like, oh God, are you going to fire me so you can hire your mom? Right? People loved her.
Yeah, she got some serious reviews. The fame has gone to her head a little bit, but that's okay. Just so everyone knows, I will bring her back for a future episode. Next time Amy's drilling down on teaching again or on vacation.
Maybe she can come on here too.
I think, Amy, I think it would be fun to have you on with my mom because you both are the funniest people I know. So I think you guys would have a hilarious time. Anyway, but in all seriousness, she did suggest today's case, which I had not heard of because she watched it on a Dr. Phil episode, which doesn't surprise me. This is some of her source of information. So it does fall in your wheelhouse, which means I can't wait to hear your thoughts at the end. For now, though, let me introduce you to Patricia Prewitt. Born to Frank and Ann Slaughter in 1949, Patricia, Patty, was raised on a 640-acre farm with horses and cattle in Lone Jack, Missouri.
Sign me up. That sounds incredible.
I know. Why does it always seem like a dream when we hear this? This was approximately 30 miles southeast of Kansas City. By the way, she had one brother and one sister, and her family spent a lot of time caring for their animals, which, as you can imagine, on a farm. So I think you and I think it sounds like a dream, but would we want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to start like all the chores with animals? Oh, you would.
I would. Yeah. You wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't. I would want to like rotate. Like, is there an afternoon shift or? Anyway, Patty describes a very happy childhood with their animals. They hung out together, the family. They played musical instruments together. So I got the impression that they were pretty tight-knit. According to Patty, when she entered the 6th grade, her father rented a house in a nearby town to get her into a better school district. And that's where she met Bill Prewitt. In their senior year of high school, the pair began dating, and they moved pretty quickly, marrying in 1968. Now, her father gave them a small house on his property, and the pair both embarked on their college careers.
How old were they when they got married? It was right after high school?
It was right after high school, 19, I think.
All right.
So even though they both started college, it became clear that they both couldn't afford to go to school. So Patty opted to drop out her sophomore year. Bill earned his college degree and became a teacher, which he worked at for several years. But his passion for furniture making and carpentry dictated a career change. So even though the pair had 3 children by this time, Bill quit teaching to become a carpenter. While they weren't rich, Patty said that things were going pretty well until a terrible incident in 1974 changed everything. The pair were visiting a nearby town so Bill could purchase some supplies, and Patty decided to explore the area while she waited for him. While walking in a park, Patty says that she was accosted by 3 men who dragged her behind some bushes and sexually assaulted her.
And this was broad daylight?
This was in broad daylight, yes. The assault was interrupted by an elderly woman, and the perpetrators fled. Now, this woman took her, I think, into her home, helped clean her up. This was 1974. A terrified Patty found Bill and told him what happened. But ultimately, they decided not to report it to the police. Now, try to remember that reporting sexual assaults was different in the 1970s. I think that they both feared what people would say about Patty and the stigma that would be attached to reporting this kind of assault, which unfortunately, obviously is very, adding trauma onto trauma. And sadly, after the assault, Patty felt differently, and she felt like Bill began acting very standoffish and cold. He became disinterested in intimacy. I think they also tried to put it behind them. Maybe they didn't talk about it. So all the things we encourage victims to do now, I'm not sure were happening then.
I wonder if he felt guilty at all.
It's possible. I'm sure a lot of feelings by both of them. Despite the feelings of loneliness and some of the strained intimacy, the couple remained together. And a few years after this incident, they moved to Holden, Missouri, where they bought a lumber yard. And they made this a successful business and became pretty well-known business owners in the community. By 1975, the pair had 4 children, but the idyllic life some might have perceived wasn't necessarily their reality. By 1975, Patty said that both she and Bill began having affairs as their relationship was very strained, but they had also separated. And during one of these separations, Patty had an affair with an old employee of the lumber yard. And in 1977, she said that she realized she was pregnant with his child. Now, this was a very big deal because while they had been separated, they were still married. So she told Bill, asking what he wanted to do. And Bill said that they would have the child, and as far as everyone was concerned, this was his child.
Oh.
Yep.
I'm assuming the other man didn't know about this.
I don't think so. Or if he did, and this was an affair, perhaps he was just happy or relieved that Bill was going to raise the child. Also, I just want you to know that Patty said that was exactly, Bill never acted any differently towards this child. For all intents and purposes, this was his child, yes. And they proceeded this way for the next 2 years. But the strain on their relationship only got worse. And one day, in a heated moment, Patty asked Bill if he wanted to just divorce. When he didn't answer her, she began throwing dishes around because she said she was so frustrated she didn't know how else to get him to pay attention. And this tactic definitely got his attention, Amy, because the pair both had these strong emotional reactions, but they sat down and they really talked about it. And she said ultimately they decided that they loved each other and they really wanted to make their relationship work. So they tried. And Patty said that some days were easier than others over the next few years, but that they were working at it and they were in a much better place. That was at least until the night of February 17th, 1984. On this evening, Bill and Patty had gone out with their friends, the Austins, for dinner and drinks on a rainy Friday night. Afterwards, they continued their night at the Austins' home, having a couple more drinks and some snacks, and they didn't return home until around 2 a.m.
Their kids were old enough to be alone at this time? Was there a sitter?
I don't know if there was a sitter or if they were alone. I don't recall. Either way, it was just them in the home after 2 a.m. Now, Bill went to bed after checking on the children, and Patty said that she loaded dishes into the sink before also going to bed. Just 1 hour later, at 3 a.m., a hysterical Patty and her 4 children pounded on the door of their next-door neighbor, who was a former police officer. And I don't know if the next-door neighbor lived close. I think there was, because I think she had a drive to the house, so I think it was not that close by. Patty had been attacked, and Bill was badly hurt at home. He called the police right away, and they responded, but unfortunately, it was too late for Bill Prewitt.
Sorry, did they not have a phone in the home? Like, why did she go to a neighbor?
Her lines were cut.
Phone
lines. She said that her lines were cut, so she couldn't make a call.
Okay.
Now, Bill had been shot and was lying in a pool of blood in their shared bed. But who the attacker was at this point was not clear. The investigation was led by a young new detective named Kevin Hughes, who arrived on the scene just after 4 a.m. While he'd risen through the ranks very quickly, he didn't have much homicide experience. And this is a pretty big case to start with. But he viewed Bill's body and he began a search of the home. He made notes about items in the house, but after that, he went to see Patty, who was still at the neighbor's house with her children. Still in her pajamas, Hughes noted visible horizontal cuts across her neck as he asked her to recount what had happened. And these, there's a photo of the scratches to Patty's neck for people who are interested. Patty explained that she put the dirty dishes in the sink, then went to bed, and she fell asleep immediately. But not long after, she was awakened by a loud noise that sounded like thunder. Then a man yanked her from her bed to the floor, held a knife to her throat, and threatened to rape her, fumbling, she said, with his belt buckle, but he fled soon after. Now, I want to add here that while she said in the statement that the rape was only threatened, sometime later, Patty would admit that it was not a threat. She was, in fact, sexually assaulted by her attacker. She didn't tell the police this, though, at the time because she wasn't thinking about herself. She was only focused on Bill. I think that she was also worried probably they wouldn't take it seriously, and we'll talk about in the discussion why that might be. She also said that the police, they didn't handle her with gentle gloves, so she might have been just afraid to discuss being sexually assaulted with them.
Also, she didn't report her prior sexual assault, right?
That's correct, yeah. Patty went on to tell Hughes that after her attacker left, she tried to check on Bill, but the lights weren't working because the power had been cut. So she ran to check on her children first to make sure they were okay, and they were. Apparently, they didn't hear what had happened. But then she also ran to the garage to get a flashlight. She said after she grabbed the flashlight, she was able to come back and shine the light on Bill. And at this time, she said that he was making a low rattling noise, but he was bleeding badly. So this is when she packed the children into the car and drove to the neighbor's house to get Bill help, which she said was her immediate priority. Detective Hughes left shortly after the interview, and the Austins picked Patty and the children up as her house was now a crime scene and she could not return. Patty was asked to come down to the police station where her hands were wiped with nitrate swabs to determine if she had fired a gun recently, which is something that is typically done, the gunshot residue test. The results were negative. Though there wasn't much to go on, Hughes believed he already knew what had happened. And that was that Patty had killed her husband.
I'm assuming you're going to get into why. Can I take a guess?
Sure.
He found out about her affair.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that she was, quote, unfaithful or violating gender norms worked against her. Maybe she didn't have the correct affect. We've heard this story way too many times.
Yep. Okay. Well, you are exactly right. He did find out very quickly about her affairs.
And let me say, sometimes that is a motive. So I'm not trying to downplay it. But this is the problem is tunnel vision and confirmation bias kicks in at this point. And in this case, it clearly did.
Well, what was also problematic is that Patty denied having affairs in the first interview.
Okay.
She later said she didn't think it was relevant. She said that she didn't know her attacker. She didn't think her affairs had anything to do with this. And she didn't think it was anyone's business. They were private people.
Story we've heard before also. But unfortunately, that's going to work against her because now she's a lying cheater.
Exactly. He brought her in, though, for a second interview. And when he confronted her with specific names, Patty confessed to having affairs with other men. Again, she didn't see the relevance. She didn't think it was important, but she did admit in the second interview to the affairs, and she spoke for 16 hours without a lawyer.
Oh, wow.
And she said without even a bathroom break, and much of the interview focused on her infidelities. However, get this, out of 16 hours, guess how much of the interview was recorded?
Oh, geez. I'm going to bet like an hour maybe?
15 minutes.
Oh, and let me guess, it's only when she was like signing something, or did she end up confessing to anything?
No, she didn't. And I'm really not sure why only 15 minutes was recorded.
What are the 15 minutes speaking of?
Nothing that's bears any real fruit, I would say. Let's put it that way. And since most of the interview wasn't recorded, we have to rely on what Hughes recorded. And one of the things that he said, many statements he said Patty made were about her sexual needs. And he said that she made a statement about her sexual prowess. The statement specifically was, quote, "My fire burns hotter than others." Now, there's no record of this. And when Patty was asked later, she said, what a ridiculous thing. Nobody would say such a thing. And I would have to say I probably agree with that. I can't imagine her saying that, or really anyone saying that.
Especially in that context?
In that context.
It makes no sense.
Despite allowing Patty to go home after the 16-hour interview, Hughes was convinced that those wounds on her neck were superficial. She did them to herself, and that she had murdered her husband and faked her own assault or attempted assault to cover it up. To this end, on February 21st, the police searched Patty and Bill's property, and they located one of Bill's missing rifles in a shallow pond on the property. that matched the weapon Bill was killed with. Now, when I say match, I simply mean it wasn't like an exact match. It was like, yes, this could have produced.
But it also could not have.
It also could not have. That is correct. They also saw boot prints near the pond, and they concluded that it was Patty's boot prints and that she had have to run down to the pond and dispose the gun there in the pond.
So far we have 2 pieces of junk science?
Kind of, yeah. And interestingly, too, they only knew, like, Bill had a gun, which they had located. They only knew to look for another one because Patty said there's a second one. Like, she told them. So, would she tell them that there was one missing and have them go look for it if she had used it? I'm not quite sure. The police also found out that Patty had 2 insurance policies on Bill. Now, I looked into this. The insurance policies were for approximately $94,000. And they believe that with the struggling business and infidelities, Patty was looking to start fresh without Bill, even though their debts exceeded something like $150,000 for the farm and whatnot. So
that doesn't make sense.
$94,000 would not have gotten them out of debt, would not have gotten her in debt. Yeah.
You said there were 2 policies that equaled 94? Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Or 95. It's less than 100, I could tell you. Nonetheless, on February 24th, 1984, just a week after Bill's murder, Patty was arrested and charged with his homicide. She was, however, released on bond to await trial, which I thought was interesting for a murder charge. Patty took her children back home, and she worked hard to keep things as normal as possible for her family. But let me tell you something, times were hard and things were very rough. She had neighbors that called and harassed her, saying awful things to her on the phone. Everyone knew about her infidelities, and the rumor was she killed her husband. Her house was broken into, items stolen. Listen to this, the family dogs, 3 dogs were found dead, likely poisoned.
No.
Yes, and when she got another dog, somebody hung her dog. Like, why do you hang the dog? What does that have to do? Like, I can't wrap my head around that. On top of all of this, on the horizon was a murder trial and the possibility of Patty never going home again.
I'm surprised that they let her out in the community facing a murder charge, but more so the fact that they let her keep her children. Isn't that surprising?
Yeah. It was 1984.
Okay.
So I want to say very different. This is like right before really tough on crime, and I think things were different. Also, this is where being a woman benefited her. I think because she was the sole caretaker now of her children and the only one who could support them, they allowed her to stay. I think that's why. Patty's trial began on April 16th, 1985, and lasted just 4 days. The opening statement by the prosecutor included the following statement. The evidence will be that Mr. Prewitt's life was feloniously taken from him, his children, his family, without justification or excuse, with premeditation, deliberation ongoing for years for the purpose of producing financial gain, satisfying sexual lust by the defendant, Patricia Prewitt. The satisfying sexual lust, this was the theme of the trial, and the affairs were the centerpiece, which was not a surprise. To this end, the prosecution called 3 men to testify about their affairs with Patty, but they also gave damning information that went beyond the affairs. They made statements that Patty had said she wished Bill was dead, and they each reported in different variations that Patty had asked them to kill Bill for her. So this did not look good.
Why would they do this? I'm assuming they weren't facing immunity for anything. Were they known? Did they have known criminal histories, any of these guys?
Yes, and I'm going to get to that. So hold that thought, because I want to talk about the prosecution first, and I'll talk about how the defense countered.
Okay.
Good question, though. It could, you know what? The answer could very well be that is what she said, and we were just looking at it through a different lens.
Yep.
The prosecution called these 3 men. Forensic pathologist James Bridgens testified that Bill was shot twice, that the second shot killed him instantly. So that meant that Patty could not have heard those rattling noises or that low gurgling noises. And he also testified that Patty's neck wounds were likely superficial. He also said that it appeared from the angle Bill was shot that the shooter would have to have been lying on top of Patty to do it, implying that it was Patty from the angle. Now, according to one source, this pathologist was later discredited for providing testimony that led to a wrongful conviction. And another source reported that his findings had been called into question by several professionals and experts who provided testimony in other cases, with one medical examiner saying that Bridgens lacked credibility in their field. He was known to testify for prosecutors, but certainly you could also argue there's always a battle of the experts, and the defense did not have an expert.
I'm sorry, does she have a public defender, do you know?
She did not have a public defender. I believe she had private counsel.
And they didn't call experts? That's strange.
No, they had exhumed Bill's body a second time because they thought perhaps there was going to be an insinuation of some type that it was self-inflicted. And the exhumation and the findings by the pathologist came very shortly before trial. So I don't know if they had the time or the money. I think the tactic was just to discredit the findings.
Okay.
The defense countered with with Patty's story that a stranger came into the home, shot Bill with his gun, and attacked Patty. They showed that there was no evidence to directly tie Patty to the crime and that having an affair was not evidence of murder. So to these men, the defense was able to discredit the men who testified them on various points. So the defense was able to elicit that all three of these men had been pressured or incentivized to provide testimony against Patty in exchange for their own leniency. So, for example, one of the men had an assault charge pending and it was dropped. One was actually considered a suspect in Bill's murder, but he was cleared when he would testify against Patty.
How convenient.
The third had a criminal history and suggested to Patty that he would leave his wife for her. And this was after Bill was dead. But he was not investigated as well since Patty was the main suspect. So it did seem that they were incentivized to provide testimony.
And I'm assuming the jury was not made aware of that part.
Well, the defense was able to bring some of this out, again, on the cross.
Okay.
They were able to elicit some of the possible pressures or incentives.
Okay.
The defense also pointed to a shoddy investigation. So lead detective Hughes failed to collect hairs from the scene because he said it looked like those hairs had been there for a while.
Based on what? Was it moldy? Like, how do you...
I don't know how you determine a hair has been there for a while. He didn't collect any fingerprints, which is totally baffling. He didn't even find a spent shell casing in the room, which was located days later by another officer. And get this, a second shell casing was found by a friend of Patty's who helped her clean up after the scene was processed. So they didn't find the shell casings in the room, the actual room. They didn't take fingerprints. They didn't collect hair. The defense simply said they didn't bother to do an investigation because they decided right from the start Patty was responsible, and so there was no point. Now, Patty took the stand as well. And while mostly she was asked about her affairs, she held to her original story about her attack and adamantly maintained her innocence. She also explained that the affairs, yes, occurred when they were separated. And just so you know, Patty had always said that Bill also had affairs or was seeing other women, but she wouldn't let her lawyer bring it up at trial.
Why?
She didn't want her kids to hear it. She wanted them to remember. She said Bill was the nicest man, the best father, and she did not want to ruin that for her children. I think she also had a naive outlook on the justice system as well. I think Patty was one of those people who believed
the truth would prevail.
If she told the truth, if she got up on the stand. Now, she didn't testify that she was sexually assaulted. Again, she insisted her defense not bring this up. She did not want her family to know. She did not want this coming out in open court. She did not want her children to hear this.
What was her demeanor like on the stand, you know? Was she likable?
I think she was likable. I don't want to say she was too sympathetic or weepy or, I hate the descriptions anyway, but I think she came off as somewhat credible and just like a normal woman. I don't know how to best describe it because
a lot of times it works against the defendant. It doesn't seem like in this case it worked against her.
I don't think it worked against her. I don't know if it helped her. And I don't, I said normal, but like there's no normal. But I mean, I don't think there was anything that was off-putting about Patty. And the prosecution was rough on her, but she wasn't a weak witness. I just don't think she was also perceived as in a negative light. And at the conclusion of the case, after she testified, the jury was sent to deliberate, and they came back unable to come to a verdict. So they told the judge that they just didn't know. But Judge Barnes urged them to go back and try harder. And lo and behold, they did try harder. And it was just later that same day, they found Patty guilty of murder. But interestingly, she was allowed to remain on bond pending her appeal. So it wasn't over just yet.
I've never heard that. I understand maybe pending sentencing, but pending appeal?
I've heard of that in a few cases. It's rare, though. It might have been more common then. Again, I think she was given consideration because of her children and because there was, if the appeal was successful, I mean, then she wouldn't disrupt the children bonds. I have to imagine she was given this option because she was the sole caretaker of her children. Now, Patty went home.
But wait, hold on. If the court's saying she's guilty of murder and then they're putting 4 children under her supervision, that doesn't really make sense either.
Remember, things were done differently. I swear, I don't think it was necessarily until maybe even the Susan Powell case that there was real serious consideration given to the fact, like, if a spouse kills if a husband or a wife kills their spouse, then the children are in danger. I don't think that was really viewed in that same light prior to 15, 20 years ago or even more recently.
Yeah. Okay.
I understand. I don't disagree with you. I think that's the case. So Patty went home, and over the next year, she took college courses. She said she was going on with her life. She had a hysterectomy because she had cancer during that time, and she recovered. But in 1986, she received some bad news. Patty lost her appeal, and she was headed to prison, leaving her children to live with her sister. But here's where things get complicated because her sister had children of her own and found it very difficult to care for Patty's children. So eventually the Prewitt children went to live with their grandmother in a trailer on her property. So I don't think this was the most ideal, but they were trying to make it work. For Patty, her adjustment to prison life was marked by resilience, positivity, and a refusal to surrender her sense of self. She was unbelievably positive, despite the fact in her earlier years, she had a real devastation in her family. One of Patty's sons died from suicide, and she was unable to even attend the funeral. And this was a terrible blow to Patty and her entire family, as you can imagine. But Patty was still able to maintain very close bonds with the rest of her children and her family, who supported her in prison and advocated for her on the outside. While Patty was denied DNA testing on several items of clothing several times throughout the years, she continued to maintain her innocence and simultaneously carved out a meaningful existence within the prison. Before I talk about that, I just want to say Patty was denied DNA testing. The court said, she said that she was not sexually assaulted. However, there would be DNA on other items. I'd also like to point out, for several years, Amy, they mysteriously could not find these items, her pajamas and other. It took years for them to surface. And I mean several years. Back to Patty in prison. She earned an associate's degree and worked as a computer programmer, as well as mentoring other prisoners through providing emotional support. And she really became a mother to those who needed it. In fact, I heard interviews from other women who said they would not have survived had it not been for Patty. And you know why you may have also heard of this case? Well, possibly Maggie covered it. Maggie Freeland covered it on wrongful conviction. So I listened to her episode as well. Patty also wrote hundreds of letters to friends, families, and journalists chronicling her experiences and her emotions. These letters became the foundation for her memoir, Trying to Catch Lightning in a Jar, which blends sharp observation, humor, and compassion. So she became an avid writer, and she was very good at it. She won awards, and she was published in literary journals, and 2 of her plays were performed at the Kennedy Center.
Oh, perfect.
I know. This is very cool. She kept going. She said that she knew that she had to be a role model, too, for her family, even on the inside. She had to show them you can still make the best out of your circumstances. You can still have a life. You can still contribute. But she also had a clemency petition. In fact, she had filed for clemency multiple times over the years with support from her family and growing support from the public as Patty's case gained in media attention. In his support of Patty's clemency petition, the former state corrections director stated, quote, I am not in a position to know whether Patty actually committed the crime, although there does seem to be a plethora of irregularities in the investigation that led to her arrest and the ensuing prosecution. He further went on to say, Patty has volunteered for thousands of hours through the restorative justice program, where she has engaged in service projects to help elderly, veterans, and abused children. So he was obviously supporting her petition. In fact, her clemency petition was signed and supported by over 20,000 people in the community. Patty said that she kept hope every day that it might be the day she went home. And then, in December of 2024, Patty and her family got quite the surprise. Missouri Governor Mike Parson commuted Patty Prewitt's sentence, essentially granting her release after 40 years.
Wow. What do you think was the strongest evidence? Again, the strongest evidence that was suggesting her innocence that led to the commutation?
I think it was a lot of factors. And I think one of them was the strong support she received from inside. The fact that it was 40 years and that she had been in prison, that she had been an absolute model prisoner, that she had growing media attention on the fact that her case was likely biased and very sexist, very misogynistic. So I think it was the perfect storm.
I just want to make sure I'm clear here. Her sentence was commuted, meaning she was released, but she wasn't exonerated, or she was also exonerated?
That's correct. No, this did not vacate her conviction. It ended her incarceration.
Gotcha.
Patty went home, and it happened very quickly. I think she was informed something like the day of or a day before, like her daughter came to visit, and she was leaving with her. So Patty went home, where she now lives with her children and her grandchildren, though she still continues to fight for her exoneration. I've seen pictures of her. She looks very happy, pictures of her with her grandkids. I'm pretty sure, by the way, she also went skydiving. I think I saw that.
How old is she now?
She is, she's like 76, I think.
Okay.
She lives life every day to the fullest. And she said how grateful she is for her release. Her sentence was at least 50 years and could have been longer. So, I mean, this is quite an incredible story, I think, in the end. And yes, when my mom suggested it to me, I was like, whoa, I was really kind of blown away. I only was able to see some of the clip of the Dr. Phil. I don't know how my mom gets every Dr. Phil episode, but yet she does. Here we are. But I want to talk now about the theory. And I'll start off by, the why this happened. Most people believe that Patty Prewitt was wrongfully convicted for several reasons. So before I go into the theory, Amy, do you have any thoughts about wrongful conviction here, possibly?
I just think this is a classic example. I mentioned it earlier of tunnel vision.
Okay. Yeah.
And confirmation bias, where early on investigators have a theory, and then any evidence that supports that theory or that confirms their theory, they will take that into account. Any evidence that goes against their theory, they don't consider that. And clearly that's what happened here. It doesn't look like they even investigated any other possibility.
No.
And only Patty. I think the fact that she, violated gender roles is a huge reason why they also looked at her. If she hadn't been having relationships with other men, I wonder how different the outcome would have been.
Yeah, I have to wonder how different it would have been too. That was exactly what I had written for my next segment, tunnel vision confirmation bias. But since you covered it better than I could, I'll also say there was a lot of doubt about the contents of Patty's interview with lead detective Hughes. And without a record, there remain serious questions about what was actually said, that statement that her fire burns hotter than others. This was read at trial and taken seriously then, but now it's almost laughable. It's interesting how changing times also reflect changing attitudes.
But even if she did say that, that doesn't point to her guilt anyway.
No, it doesn't. It does not point to her guilt, right?
But that is something that I think probably stuck with the jurors.
I think a lot of this stuck with the jurors. Now, we don't often discuss the actual theory. We discuss the themes behind the theory that I'm going to say here, and that's critical feminist theory. So feminist criminology examines how gender, power, and patriarchy influence criminal behavior and the justice system. So while, yes, affair can be motive. In the way the prosecution focused on Patty's affairs, some of which occurred years, or most of which occurred years before the murder, during a marital separation, they used that to show that she was immoral. She was a bad mother, they said. They actually said this came at behest of her mothering, and nobody had ever said she was a bad mother. Nobody believed that. And she was then labeled as the deviant, bad mother who lusts or is satisfying her sexual lust, as they said. So I really think, like you said, her trial reflected these patriarchal norms that punish women for stepping outside their traditional roles. Mm-hmm. Actual evidence of her involvement in the crime was really lacking, but the judgments about her moral character seemed to overshadow the facts.
So I'm assuming the alternate potential suspects are maybe some of the men she was having an affair with. Is there any other possibilities?
I mean, there was never any other possibilities generated. And even though I think it would have been easy for Patty to point the finger at one of the three men that she had an affair with, she felt pretty sure that she did not recognize her attacker. Okay. So I think even at the convenience of throwing them under the bus, even after they were throwing her under the bus, she didn't do that.
What would be the motive if it was a stranger attack?
Well, it could be an actual sexual assault. That could have been the actual motive because she said she was sexually assaulted. So they killed her husband and he killed her husband and sexually assaulted her. Maybe murder was the actual motive, and then a sexual assault came secondary. As we know, sometimes during the commission of one crime, other felonies are committed. So I do understand why the police had questions and looked, of course, at Patty as a suspect, but I just don't believe they came up with the evidence to show that Patty was the perpetrator.
I agree.
It seems like a perfect storm, like the tunnel vision, lack of investigation, poor police practices, not recording an interview, sexism, labeling, all these things really culminated in her conviction. Mm-hmm. She didn't give up hope, though. I mean, I have to say, Patty's story really is the story of unrelenting hope. 4 decades behind bars haven't silenced her, and they haven't deterred her from trying to find justice for husband and exoneration for herself.
Good for her.
Yeah. I think her story really extends beyond one person, though. It challenges us also, to demand better investigations, better representation, better accountability, better justice.
And I would like to think if this was today, it would have been handled a bit differently.
I'd like to think that as well.
Or at the very least, there would have been surveillance or cell phone records or some other investigative tools that could have either included other people or excluded her.
Yeah, I would like to think so, too. If this story, moved you, I always implore people to share it, question what justice really looks like, support those fighting for reform, and also remember that justice does not come in the form of a verdict always. It's a commitment, a long-term one. Mm-hmm. I think Patty's story also reminds us that even in the face of injustice, we're never really powerless. Okay. That's everything I have for today's episode. And but before we go today, we have 2 questions from the audience, Amy. 2. That's correct.
Okay.
All right. This one's going to be a good one. Probably for you or for me, but I'll let you. Do you think that our current prison system is what is best for our inmates? Or do you think a more progressive approach like what they do in Europe prisons would be better?
I mean, anyone who listens to the show knows my answer here. Our prisons are extremely flawed. We had the opportunity together to visit a prison in London.
Oh, my goodness.
I talk to my students all the time about how just having a curtain around the toilet, just that little sense of humanity that you could give to people, I think goes such a long way.
Or the clothes they were wearing.
Yep.
The friendliness that the warden had. I mean, I remember that nobody seemed depressed even. I mean, you can't judge that, sorry, but the atmosphere was not depressing.
I mean, they were training to be baristas. They were gardening. They were learning real life skills that can be translated to the labor market. So yes, that is a big, big, I don't know how else to say it. Our system is not doing, evidenced by our recidivism rate. If our prisons were rehabilitating people, we wouldn't see such a high recidivism rate.
Right. the high recidivism rate is like the revolving door. It just never ends. So we're doing something wrong. It's not a mark of success that people are going back to prison by any means.
It's success for those who are profiting off of the big business that is prison.
Yeah, that's very true. By the way, that person also further went on that they have clients who went to jail and prison and say how awful it was for them, and he or she would like to make a change and sincerely hope that you can be part of a change for people who are incarcerated. Thank you. Second question is, one, we answered something somewhat related on our on another episode recently, but do you think juveniles should have their sentences commuted to adult prisons? I'm torn on this one, but I feel like it's unjust. So they're saying sentences commuted to adult prison. So I think they're saying, do you think juveniles should be allowed to, I think it's a little bit different because they're saying, should juveniles be allowed to spend time in adult prisons?
No, they shouldn't. Juveniles should never be spending time in an adult prison. If they are tried as an adult, then they stay in a juvenile facility until they age up to an adult facility.
That's usually what happens. So usually a juvenile will stay in a juvenile detention facility until they're 18 or 21. But some states have lower standards. Oh, gosh, I forget which state it is. They can be moved as early as 16 to be moved with adults. No, 18 is really young, too. Think about what an 18-year-old is like around 35-year-old men. This is really young as well. I probably favor the 21-year-old standard. I think that's a more appropriate transfer age.
And not only are, we want to protect juveniles, even if they have committed a crime, we don't want them to be potentially victimized by adults, but also it doesn't do anyone any good if they're so impressionable and they're learning from those around them. And if you're putting them with older people who are not on the path to rehabilitation, that's not doing anyone any good.
I mean, this comes from after, in the beginning of our system of incarceration, juveniles were allowed to be housed with adults. And because of all the negative consequences, legislation prohibits this now. But it still happens on rare occasion. And no, I don't think there's any benefit to having that, those two mix. Okay, thank you for those questions. We really appreciate it. If you have a question for us, feel free to message us at womenandcrimepodcast.com/contact. And as a reminder, if you're a patron at the Lifer tier, your question is guaranteed to be read on air. All right, thank you so much for being with us on today's episode, and we'll catch you next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonso. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime. Sources for today include People.com, Guernica magazine, the Riverfront Times, and the Transcript from State v. Prewitt 2019.